Have you ever wondered how Abraham, an ordinary man, became the father of faith and changed the course of humanity's spiritual history? How someone, living peacefully in his homeland, chose to leave everything behind and venture into the unknown simply because God called him. This is the story of a man who dared to believe in a divine promise. A man who, with unshakable faith, faced overwhelming challenges, walked through deserts, and nearly sacrificed what he held most dear, all to follow God's call. But why Abraham? Why was he chosen to be the father of nations? What lessons can we learn from his journey, a path that echoes across the centuries, inspiring millions around the world? Would you have the courage to obey such a daunting call? Would you be willing to leave everything behind and follow the voice of God? Today, we'll dive into the extraordinary journey of Abraham, exploring how his unwavering faith transformed the destiny of entire generations. Get ready for an epic narrative that reveals not just the strength of one man, but the true power of faith. Let us discover together how Abraham, through his steadfast belief, became the father of faith and changed the world. Of the Chaldeans, a wealthy, prosperous city filled with polytheistic traditions. It was there that Abraham lived, surrounded by a culture that worshipped multiple deities. His life was peaceful, marked by the kind of stability many long for. But amid this ordinary routine, something extraordinary happened. God spoke to Abraham, a voice that came not from idols or the rituals so common in but from the one true God, the creator of heaven and earth. And the message was clear and direct. Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. Genesis 12:1 NIV. Imagine the impact of those words, leaving everything behind: family, friends, safety, setting out toward an unknown destination, driven by nothing but faith. And God made an astonishing promise: I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Genesis 12:2 NIV. This was not just a command, it was a divine promise. God's call was both a challenge and a declaration of purpose. Abraham had to choose between the comfort of his homeland and obedience to a voice calling for unshakable faith. How often do we find ourselves in that same dilemma, trapped by what is familiar and safe, afraid to leave behind the things that bring us comfort? But God didn't call Abraham to stay in place. He called him to change the course of history. Abraham didn't argue. He didn't ask for proof or guarantees. He simply obeyed. He knew that responding to God's call would take courage, and that decision would define not only his destiny, but the destiny of all humanity. Together with Sarah, his wife, and Lot, his nephew, he gathered all his possessions and servants and set out. The journey had begun. Along the way, Abraham reflected on God's promise. How could an old man and his barren wife become the parents of a great nation? Even so, he chose to believe. His unshakable faith became the driving force that moved him forward, even when the future was uncertain. On this path of faith, Abraham also faced inner struggles. The uncertainty of what lay ahead could have paralyzed him, but he chose not to look back. His trust in God kept him steady, even when human logic couldn't explain the purpose of the journey. And what about you? Have you ever felt called to something greater, but feared stepping out of your comfort zone? Abraham teaches us that faith requires action and courage. May we learn from his example and take bold steps into the unknown, trusting in God's purpose. Before we move on, I want to make a special request. If this story is already touching your heart, take a moment to leave a like and share it with someone who needs to hear about faith and courage. It helps us reach more people with these powerful stories. And if you love Bible stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way you won't miss any new videos and will continue to grow spiritually through deep, inspiring reflections. Together, we'll keep exploring stories that strengthen the soul and inspire us to walk with God, even when the road is hard. And don't forget to comment below. Have you ever experienced a moment when you had to trust God even without understanding the path ahead? We'd love to hear your story. Abraham's departure from Ur was an act of faith that still echoes today. He didn't know what awaited him, but he knew God's promise was greater than any hardship. He believed that God would fulfill his word, and that faith became the foundation of his entire journey. This journey of faith teaches us that obeying God's call requires courage and a willingness to leave behind what is safe and familiar. Abraham became an example for everyone who, at some point, must make difficult decisions in the name of a higher purpose. Have you ever felt like God is calling you to something greater? Abraham chose to trust, and that choice changed the world. Let's continue walking this path together and discover how Abraham faced the trials that came after he left Ur. Get ready to encounter the obstacles that tested his faith and learn how he persevered in his spiritual journey. The faith that led Abraham to leave Ur was only the beginning. The real test was still ahead, when the road became rougher and the challenges began to multiply. After leaving Ur, Abraham began his journey into the unknown. The faith that drove him forward also placed him face to face with many challenges. The nomadic life was anything but easy. Abraham and his family had to adapt to the unexpected, facing the harshness of the desert, food shortages, and the uncertainty of the path ahead. But amid those hardships, an even greater problem arose. Famine spread throughout the land, and Abraham was forced to make a difficult decision. To ensure his family's survival, he chose to go down to Egypt in search of resources. Egypt was known for its prosperity and abundance, but it was also a foreign land, full of risks and uncertainties. Abraham knew that Sarah, his wife, was very beautiful. Fearing for his life, he asked her to say she was his sister, believing that if the Egyptians knew she was his wife, they might kill him to take her. This decision, born out of fear, led to unexpected consequences. Pharaoh, captivated by Sarah's beauty, brought her into his palace, unaware of her true identity. But God intervened powerfully, sending plagues upon Pharaoh's household. Soon, Pharaoh discovered that Sarah was actually Abraham's wife. Fearing the God who protected this man, he summoned Abraham, returned Sarah to him, and ordered them to leave Egypt with all their possessions. This experience revealed Abraham's human side, a man of great faith, yet someone who still wrestled with fear and insecurity. But God, in his mercy, did not abandon him, even when his choices were driven by fear. Instead, God turned his mistake into a lesson and allowed Abraham to leave Egypt wealthier and spiritually stronger. Returning to the desert brought a sense of relief and reflection. Abraham came to understand that his journey wasn't just a physical path, but a spiritual process of growth. He learned that faith does not mean the absence of failure, but the willingness to correct course and keep moving forward. His relationship with his nephew Lot also brought new challenges. Both men had accumulated large herds, possessions, and servants. The land could no longer support them both, and soon disputes arose between their herdsmen, creating a conflict that demanded resolution. Abraham, demonstrating wisdom and selflessness, offered a peaceful solution. To avoid further strife, he proposed that they separate, and generously gave Lot the first choice of land. Lot, seeing the well-watered plains of the Jordan, chose what seemed best in his eyes, settling near the fertile cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham remained in the land of Canaan. This moment revealed Abraham's generous character. He wasn't concerned with claiming the best land for himself because he trusted that God was in control. His decision reflected his confidence in the divine promise, while Lot chose based on human sight, drawn by comfort and abundance. After their separation, God once again appeared to Abraham and reaffirmed his promise. "Lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever." Genesis 13:14-15, NIV. God assured Abraham that his descendants would be as countless as the dust of the earth. Abraham's faith, even amid difficult decisions, was rewarded. He understood he didn't need to fight for blessings. God had already prepared something far greater for his life. This passage teaches us that faith is also expressed through our actions in moments of conflict. When we trust God, we can let go of disputes and allow him to determine the outcome. Abraham knew that preserving peace was more important than claiming the best land. From there, Abraham settled near the great trees of Mamre in Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. This act demonstrated his devotion and gratitude for all the promises God had confirmed. What do we learn from this stage of Abraham's journey? That faith is built day by day in the decisions we make and in how we respond to challenges. Abraham teaches us that maintaining peace and trusting in God's provision are essential attitudes for a solid spiritual walk. Have you ever had to give up something important in order to preserve peace? Abraham's story shows us that when we put God first, he takes care of our path and blesses us in ways we can't even imagine. The journey of faith is not made up solely of victories and triumphs. It also involves moments of doubt, hard choices, and sacrifice. But Abraham believed that above all was the divine promise guiding his steps. As he continued his trek through the desert, Abraham knew greater challenges still lay ahead, but his unshakable faith kept him moving, willing to face whatever trials came. Each step brought him closer to the fulfillment of the promise, and he was determined to keep going, trusting that God would never leave him. But Abraham would soon face a new test, one that would require not just faith, but the courage to fight for his family. In the next episode, we'll see how he had to act swiftly to rescue his nephew Lot from deadly danger. Abraham's journey of faith wasn't only about trusting in divine promises. There were moments when faith demanded action, boldness, strength, and determination. One such moment came when his nephew Lot was taken captive during a regional war. After separating from Abraham, Lot chose to settle in the fertile plains near Sodom, drawn by the richness of the land. But he didn't foresee the danger that would come. War broke out among the kings of the region, and amid the conflict, Sodom was plundered. Lot and his family were taken as prisoners, along with all their possessions. When Abraham heard about Lot's capture, his heart filled with concern, but also resolve. He couldn't stand by and ignore his nephew's suffering. Though he wasn't a trained warrior, Abraham knew he had to act. He quickly gathered his allies and assembled a small force of 318 trained men, all born in his household. It was a modest army compared to the enemies they would face, but Abraham wasn't intimidated. His courage came from the certainty that God was with him, even in this dangerous mission. Without delay, Abraham devised a plan to catch the enemy off guard. By night, he split his men and launched a surprise attack. His bold strategy, empowered by divine protection, led to victory. Lot was rescued, along with his entire family and all their belongings. This episode shows that true faith is not passive. Abraham didn't sit back and wait for a miracle while his nephew was in danger. He took action, trusting that God would honor his righteous and courageous stand. After the victory, Abraham returned with Lot and the other captives. On the way back, a remarkable encounter took place. Melchizedek, king of Salem and priest of God Most High, came to meet Abraham. Melchizedek brought out bread and wine and blessed Abraham, recognizing that the victory was the result of divine intervention. In gratitude, Abraham gave Melchizedek a tenth of everything he had gained. This gesture reflected his acknowledgement that everything he possessed came from the hand of God. He knew the victory was not of his own doing. It was the Lord's blessing and protection. Melchizedek then declared, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." Genesis 14:19-20, NIV. Following this encounter, the king of Sodom approached Abraham with an offer. He could keep all the recovered goods, while the king would take the rescued people. But Abraham refused. He declared that he didn't want anyone to say he had grown rich from Sodom's wealth. His trust was entirely in God, and he didn't want earthly riches to tarnish his testimony of faith. Abraham chose to preserve his integrity rather than accept favors that could compromise his spiritual reputation. Abraham's decision teaches us that faith is not driven by personal gain. Even after a great victory, he sought no material advantage. His focus was on remaining blameless before God, showing that his actions were motivated by justice, not by selfish interests. This courageous and principled attitude reveals that true faith stands firm, even in the face of tempting offers. Abraham was not swayed by easy wealth, for he knew his prosperity came from the Lord alone. Lot's rescue also challenges us to consider how we respond when our loved ones are in trouble. Are we willing to fight for them, even if it means taking personal risks? Abraham didn't hesitate. For him, rescuing his nephew was not just a family duty, but an act of love and responsibility. He didn't let fear or comfort keep him from acting. His example teaches us that faith steps up when others are in need, even if it demands effort and sacrifice. After returning home, Abraham understood that God had not only sustained him in battle, but had strengthened him spiritually. The victory was a reminder that trust in the Lord always brings meaningful results. Abraham's courage inspires us to act with boldness and integrity, even in difficult situations. His faith wasn't limited to waiting for miracles. It translated into decisive action, proving that genuine faith is never passive. The rescue of Lot marked a powerful moment in Abraham's journey, showing that faith is not just about believing, it's about acting with courage and responsibility. Abraham had won a physical and spiritual battle, but the greatest test of his faith was still ahead. The fulfillment of God's promise would come with the birth of Isaac, bringing joy and renewal, but also the ultimate trial that would test Abraham's very heart. Years had passed since Abraham left Ur, following God's call into the unknown. Throughout his entire journey, the promise that he would become the father of a great nation remained alive, even when the circumstances seemed impossible. But time went on, and both Abraham and Sarah grew old, and the long-awaited child still hadn't come. At times, doubt tried to weaken their hope. Sarah especially bore the burden of infertility, something that in those days was seen as more than just the inability to have children. It was considered a form of shame. Yet Abraham held fast to his faith, believing that God would fulfill what he had promised. Then one day, God appeared to Abraham once again and reaffirmed his promise. He declared that Sarah would bear a son, even in her old age. The news seemed so unlikely that Sarah, listening from outside the tent, laughed to herself. How could a 90-year-old woman give birth? Abraham, at 99, was also amazed. But God responded with a question that would echo through eternity. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Genesis 18:14, NIV. This question wasn't just a correction of Sarah's laugh. It was a renewal of hope. God was making it clear that his faithfulness is not limited by human impossibilities. And the impossible happened. Sarah conceived and gave birth to a son, just as God had promised. Abraham named him Isaac, which means laughter. Now the laughter that once expressed doubt had become a symbol of joy. Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." Genesis 21:6, NIV. Isaac's birth was not just the fulfillment of a personal promise. It was a sign that God turns tears into joy and makes the improbable become real. For Abraham, holding that child in his arms was like seeing years of hope and faith materialize. The child grew strong and healthy, and Abraham and Sarah finally lived the dream of parenthood. Isaac wasn't just the future of their lineage. He was the confirmation that true faith is never in vain. Abraham understood that even with the passage of time, God never forgets what he promises. However, the road to this moment of joy had not been without mistakes. Years earlier, in their impatience, Abraham and Sarah had tried to help God's plan. That decision led to the birth of Ishmael, the son of Hagar, Sarah's maidservant. Acting in their own strength brought conflict and heartache. But with Isaac's birth, It became clear that the promise was not dependent on human effort, but on divine faithfulness. This story teaches us that we often try to rush God's timing. Anxiety leads us to seek shortcuts, but Abraham learned that true faith waits, even when everything seems against it. The promise fulfilled in Isaac's birth proved that God doesn't need our help to do the impossible. When Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast in celebration. The child who once seemed like an impossible dream was now bringing joy and hope to everyone around. God's promise had come to pass. Yet another conflict soon emerged. Sarah noticed that Ishmael was mocking Isaac, and fearing for her son's future, she asked Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away. It was a painful moment. Abraham loved Ishmael deeply, but God reassured him, saying he would take care of Ishmael and make him a great nation as well, but that Isaac would be the child of the promise. With a heavy heart, Abraham sent Hagar and Ishmael away, trusting that God would care for them. This moment showed Abraham that faith also requires obedience, even in painful decisions. He had to believe that God would remain faithful to all his children, without exception. And indeed, God honored that faith, keeping his word concerning both Isaac and Ishmael. The birth of Isaac was more than a personal triumph. It was a message to future generations that God makes the impossible happen. No matter the circumstances or how much time passes, the Lord is faithful to his word. As Isaac grew, each step he took reminded Abraham of God's promise. He understood that this boy was the beginning of the great nation God had foretold. Isaac was living proof that faith doesn't just wait, it endures. Even after receiving the blessing, Abraham continued to live a life of faith. He knew his journey wasn't over. The same faith that led him to leave his homeland and wait years for the promised child was now preparing him for the greatest test of all. Isaac's birth challenges us to believe that God is powerful enough to fulfill every promise, no matter how impossible it may seem. His faithfulness surpasses our expectations. Sarah's laughter reminds us that when God moves, he turns doubt into joy and makes the impossible reality. Yet Abraham and Sarah had no idea that the greatest trial of faith was still ahead. The joy of having Isaac by their side would soon be tested by the most heartbreaking command Abraham had ever received, the sacrifice of his own son. Time passed, and Isaac grew healthy and strong, bringing joy to Abraham and Sarah. God's promise was there, alive, tangible, and real. In his son, Abraham saw the future of the great nation God had promised. Everything seemed finally at peace, until one day God called Abraham once more. But this time, the command was unlike anything he had ever heard. God said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will show you." Genesis 22:2 NIV. Abraham's heart must have stopped for a moment. How could God ask for Isaac's life? This boy was the fulfillment of the promise, the future of his descendants. Abraham could have questioned the command or refused it outright, but his unshakable faith prevailed. He didn't know what God would do, but he believed the Lord had a higher purpose. Early the next morning, without hesitation, Abraham prepared for the journey. He took Isaac, 2 servants, and the wood for the burnt offering. The road to Moriah was long and quiet. Father and son walked together, but only Abraham knew the weight of the mission. On the 3rd day, seeing the place from afar, Abraham told his servants to wait, saying he and Isaac would go to worship and then return. His words were filled with hope. "We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Genesis 22:5 NIV. He believed that God would provide a way, even if he didn't know how. As they climbed, Isaac broke the silence with a question that pierced Abraham's heart. "Father, the fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Genesis 22:7 NIV. With a trembling voice, Abraham replied, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." Genesis 22:8 NIV. When they reached the mountaintop, Abraham built the altar, arranged the wood, and with deep sorrow bound Isaac and laid him on the altar. The boy's eyes may have reflected confusion and sadness, but also obedience to his father. Abraham raised the knife, ready to carry out God's command. At that exact moment, a voice from heaven called out, "Abraham, Abraham!" It was the angel of the Lord stopping him. "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." The Genesis 22:12 NIV. Overwhelmed with relief, Abraham looked around and saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. Grateful beyond words, he sacrificed the ram in place of his son. That place was named Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide. God then reaffirmed his promise, saying, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore." Genesis 22:16-17 NIV. Abraham's relief was more than just for Isaac's spared life. It was the joy of knowing that his faith had been tested and found true. He understood that God never truly desired Isaac's death, but the full surrender of Abraham's heart. It was a test to reveal the depth of his trust. This story challenges us with a powerful question. Are we willing to place what we love most in God's hands? Abraham's faith wasn't just spoken, it was lived out in acts of total trust. He believed that even in the face of the greatest sacrifice, God had a plan far beyond his understanding. The near sacrifice of Isaac points us to a profound spiritual truth. God never wanted Isaac's life. He wanted to teach Abraham and us that genuine faith is unconditional. Abraham didn't set limits on his obedience, even when the command seemed unthinkable. This moment urges us to reflect. Are we also willing to place our greatest treasures in God's hands, trusting that He knows what's best? Abraham showed that faith isn't only about receiving blessings, it's about giving everything out of love for the Lord. Isaac descended the mountain with his father, both forever changed by what had taken place. Abraham knew that his son was a miracle, given and preserved by God for a special purpose. His faith wasn't just approved, it was deepened. This event also foreshadows something much greater. Many centuries later in that same region, another father would offer his only son as a sacrifice. But this time, there would be no substitute. Jesus, the Lamb of God, would die to save all humanity, fulfilling the divine purpose of redemption. In that ram, Abraham saw a symbol of God's provision. The sacrifice he nearly made was a prophetic glimpse of the perfect sacrifice to come. Abraham's faith leads us to the cross, where we see that God did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all. The story of Isaac's near sacrifice remains a timeless symbol of faith that obeys even without full understanding. Abraham proved that he loved God above all else, and that total surrender transforms not just one life, but entire generations. After this supreme test, Abraham continued his journey, now fully assured that God was faithful to fulfill every promise. From that moment on, his life became a lasting legacy of faith and obedience, a testimony that still inspires countless hearts to trust God without limits. Abraham's life was marked by trials, difficult choices, and above all, an unshakable faith that made him the father of faith. From the moment he heard God's call to the day he faced the sacrifice of Isaac, his journey showed that believing is not merely waiting, it is acting with courage and confidence in God's divine purpose. Abraham didn't just change his own story, he impacted generations to come. His obedience made him the patriarch not only of Israel, but of all nations that share in his faith. Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike see in Abraham an example of total devotion and surrender to God. Abraham's legacy challenges us to live a faith that goes beyond human limits, trusting that when God makes a promise, He will fulfill it. His spiritual journey teaches us that true faith doesn't look for shortcuts. It remains steadfast, even in the face of the impossible. May Abraham's courage and faith inspire your daily decisions. Let us live as he did, trusting that God is faithful and never fails. When we surrender wholeheartedly, the Lord transforms our lives and uses us to fulfill plans far greater than we could ever imagine. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and share it. We'd love to hear how Abraham's faith has impacted you. And if you desire to live a genuine, unshakable faith like Abraham's, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Together, we'll continue exploring stories that strengthen the soul and inspire us to walk with God, even when the journey feels difficult. May your faith also become a legacy for generations to come.